Hello and welcome to another Satisfactory video. I'm Maltese and this is all about drones. In particular, I want to talk about what I call drone circuits or loops and how to set them up and make the most out of them. Drones are kind of a late game utility. I think they're tier 8, so just before your final phase of space elevator stuff. But they come in really handy when you want to deliver items across the map. And unlike trains or trucks, there's no setup that you need between point A and point B. So that makes drones a really good choice if you've got a long distance between two factories, but you don't need a ton of items in order to support that factory. So for instance, I'm bringing in these fluid tanks from my giant aluminum factory and bringing them over here so that I can create fuel for my drones. What I want to talk about is how you can set up drone stations with multiple drone ports all over your map without having to supply fuel to each of them individually. What I call a circuit or a loop is just starting from a fuel source. I'll decide to go to one nearby receiving port. And then from that receiving port, I go to another nearby receiving port. And then I keep repeating that, going to 2, going to 5, and then eventually when I get to the end and there are no more, I'm going to run it back to the source. And this loop, I'll show you on the map, so this cluster of ports here is where we start. Now that delivers items over to the aluminum factory, up to this northern factory, and then to this main factory over here where we started. Flies over to this. It was my starter plastic and rubber factory, and then finally they come all the way back down here. And as you watch the drones flying around, you'll see I have other types of drones that never come down here to fuel. And also, although you can't see this on the map, none of these have fuel supplies directly, except for this one. But I don't think I'm even using that. I think I'm using the rocket fuel and not the fuel that this generates. Setting these up, the way that you do this is by routing the output port on your port, I don't know what else to call it, back into your input. So whatever the outgoing items are, come from the incoming items and scroll back over. And then, from your outgoing, we can watch this happen. We just luckily got a drone sitting down. So we got items coming in from the incoming. Now, if you remember, those were coming from receiving 5. So to get them to receiving 5, we're routing the output of receiving 5 back into its outgoing port. Each link in this chain runs its incoming back into its outgoing, and so the next drone that comes along picks those up. And each drone that travels in that circle just picks up whatever's there at the time and moves it on to the next one. So you have this big cycle going all around the map. And what this lets you do is put drone ports and drone stations everywhere. You could power literally every drone you need for a reasonable game. If you're doing a lot of mega bases and you need to move a lot of items around, trains are probably a better option. If you look at the items, this is 403 items per minute, so what, that's 5 stacks every minute. So what would that be? 500 items? That's like, what, a Mark 3 or Mark 4 belt. I have seen as high as 900, so if you have a lot of items in a stack, so high stacks like screws or concrete, you could deliver a lot more of those simply because they're bigger stacks. It's only limited by the number of stacks you can pick up, as far as I know. I want to take you back over to where one of these is set up. So I'm going to take you to the starter base. Okay, so now I'm at my starter base, and here's one of the fuel receiving ports. So you'll notice it has basically the same setup as the source port, but there is a little bit of a different configuration on the splitters and mergers. I've got a smart splitter that just runs the overflow into the outgoing. And this is set up similarly on every one in that chain. And that delivers fuel to all of these, and then I'm running that underneath this platform to all the others. Basically just this little hub, and each one has its own role. But it's a nice setup. So eventually, if you're not using up all the items continually, which you probably won't be, you're going to have to deal with the overflow of the final leg in this back to the source. You can do that by running it into storage, dedicating a large chunk of that to power supply, and then having a backup sink as a failsafe, I think is one smart way to do it if you want to just maximize the efficiency on what you do with all this fuel. So here's another example of how this can be set up with one smart splitter and then running all the items underneath to go into the other drone ports that you have for one setup. Now, this is nice. Everyone's always topped off, and so nobody needs to get stuck. So let's jump over to the creative world and build a few of these and then do a demo of how this works so you can see it sort of sending and receiving at the same time. Okay, so I'm over here in this creative world, and I've got a setup here where I can put drones into place, and I wanted to show you that you can actually put drones on a 2x3 set. You don't need a full 3x3 block, which is sort of the footprint of the drone port. You can squeeze it into just slightly under 2x3. So you can do a 3x3 and then have this trailing over, and I think this looks really nice. You get this cool look, especially if it's sitting off the edge of some other building. It's really cool. Alright, so the first example I'll show is how to set up a fuel source. For your fuel source, you have to handle both the fuel for the drone and the fuel that you're going to deliver everywhere else. So you definitely have to go into this, but you also want to handle the outflow that you're going to get when that thing returns. So we add a merger here. And then I like to do this. If you want, you can skip this part and just run everything into a sink. But I think this is a little more efficient, where you run a smart splitter into this, and then you make this an overflow, and you make your right, in this case, an any. I know that looks like a left. This always confuses me. You gotta think from a top-down view. So now I can run all of my items out to a sink. I can deliver items into my incoming from outside, wherever I'm building these. And I can fuel my own drone from this port. And this is the most useful setup. I don't think there's much more you can do. You can probably split this out to something else if you want, but otherwise, this is it. So for the receiving, it's a little bit easier because you don't have to deal with as many splitters or mergers. You really only need the one. So you do a smart splitter. You're going to run that immediately from the receiving side, and you're going to run one into here and one into here. And then this line will go out to all of the other drone ports that you might have in a line. So this will take any, our center output will take any, and then we'll run the overflow back into the outgoing port. And that's all you really need for a receiving port for fuel. Alright, so the item receiving is very simple. You start with a smart splitter, and you're going to run it pretty much like you did for fuel. But you have a choice here. You can either split between the center and right or center and left. But you could just do a regular splitter if you want to. I use a smart splitter because I'm anticipating maybe doing something slightly different in the future. But if you only have one and you're returning directly to the source, I recommend doing an overflow here. That way all your items are coming out until the rest of the system is saturated. So if you do wind up with a stalled belt, everything else will come back in here, go back to the source, and you don't waste them as much. And then in the future, if you want to have another item in the chain, you can revert this back to an any, and you don't have to change out anything. You just change the settings, and now you can add a third one in that chain. For general item source, you don't have to worry about the input fuel. So all you need to do with that is route items from your output back into the input. And so it is slightly different, but you just start with the merger, and you don't have to worry too much about where that merger goes. I like to use a smart splitter here, just so I can run as many items as I can back into the input. So if I have a sparse source or a few items coming in at a time, I don't waste the items that come back. So I'll make the center output an overflow and the right output take all the items by default. So that means everything will run into here back to be delivered out to the chain again. And then items that are coming in from elsewhere will just contribute to more of that. You don't need this middle link if, say, you're saturating these belts and you're never running out of items. That's fine. You can do away with this and just run these directly into a sink or into storage or whatever you want to do with them. We're going to start with just 2 empty drone stations set up for fuel, like I had before. And we're going to run everything in from this side, but I'm going to take this out for now, because I want to preload this with, let's do 5 of these. So we'll have 5 stacks of fuel that we're going to cycle through these, just a small amount so you can see what it's going to do. We're going to use these stacks of fuel to prime the ports so that the drones can travel, and then we're going to see what happens. So I've got it set up like this. We've got our incoming port, we've got our outgoing port, where you're going to be taking all of your items to wherever you need it, and we're going to do no trucks. Unfortunately, there's no truck icon. Alright, let's do a demo. In order to really see what this is doing, I want to add an output, so we're going to really quickly just add a storage container over here. That way we'll have somewhere for this excess fuel to go into, and then this will take the role of factory or other item. I've cheated in a whole bunch of items, so I'm going to put in several of these, take out a few stacks, and I had recorded a demo with the 5 stacks. It was really boring, so I came back in and wanted to do a more interesting demo, so we'll do a full set of this. We'll let it run for a minute. You'll see exactly how this functions in a real setup, and hopefully give you a better idea how you can use this for your own builds. So here we go. We'll start by a bunch of fuel running into the outgoing port. That'll fill up, and eventually this drone is going to pick that up. It's going to take it over here. And we'll skip ahead. Right, so my guy on the right has gotten bored, and he's going to fly up. But no one has left on the source. So drone won't lift off until it's got either all its items or the incoming port is empty. Let's cheat a little. Oh wow, look, it filled up. Alright, now that that's full, this guy will take off and give the other guy a chance to land. Now luckily they'll both be in sync, they'll be landing and taking off at roughly the same time, so they shouldn't get in each other's way anymore. The right hand side is just come back to the left, and hopefully it has some items in its storage that will start coming through the outgoing port, and we'll see those flow back into either the containment unit or the incoming port. Right, there they go. So because we're trying to be efficient, everything's going to flow into the outgoing containment. And there's never going to be enough in this setup, so it's just going to keep flowing like that. If we had more items, we could see some of those would start flowing out of the overflow when that filled up. But this is good enough to demonstrate everything that you're going to need. So there you have it. This will keep going for a very long time because, except for the fuel that's gone out to this thing, everything else is back in the system and will continue to go through these 2 drones back and forth as they deliver those items. If you found this interesting and you want to know more about other types of transportation in Satisfactory, let me know. We talk about trucks. Trucks are very similar to drones in a lot of respects, but there are some challenges with them. And we could talk about trains, but if you've watched some of the teaser for 1.1, there's a few interesting train things and some speculation that maybe trains will get a little bit better. Right now in 1.0, they're a little bit hard to manage. You can do it, and they're still really useful for delivering huge amounts of items, but the setup cost is high, and there's a ton of videos already about trains, so I'm not really going to have anything new to say until 1.1 comes out. I think I'll wait for that. If you like this video, give it a like, and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos like this, and let me know in the comments if there's anything specific you'd like to see, and as always, thanks. Bye.